This haunting movie starts with Benjamin Esposito, a judicial officer who has been stuck on a homicide case. A judicial officer is similar to a paralegal investigator. He investigates the assault and murder of Liliana on June 21, 1974. The movie begins with him recounting every detail of the horrific crime, from the account of the victim's husband, Ricardo, when he was still investigating it. He writes it like he is writing a novel, but he is unsatisfied. The next scene moves to the actual brutal act. He goes to the Justice Hall courthouse, even though he is already retired. He visits his former colleague, Irene. Irene talks about her new career, writing novels, which is something Benjamin wants to do as well. Benjamin visits her to ask about the Morales case, Liliana's case. Irene suddenly falls silent upon hearing it, and we get the sense it must be an off-topic conversation. Benjamin spends a lot of time handwriting, so Irene gives him a typewriter. The problem is, Benjamin doesn't know where to start. Irene suggests that he start from the beginning. This goes back 2 decades, to when Benjamin first met her. He seems to be struck by her at first sight. Back when Benjamin was an officer, a report of a came to their district. Benjamin wonders how Pablo is so good at speaking to women, as he smoothly compliments Irene. They have several cases to deal with. The older lawyers and investigators advise him on his career as a lawyer, and tell him that he should attend the most serious cases. Younger Benjamin goes to visit the crime scene, the Morales home. He sees Liliana's gruesome corpse lying on the floor untouched, and he feels awe and pity. Liliana was only 23 years old and newly married, and she was a school teacher. Benjamin compares the happy couple in the photos to Liliana's tragic state. The police and Benjamin inform Ricardo, the husband, of the news. He is shocked and quiet. Ricardo is a banker. Naturally, he falls under suspicion. Why did he go home for lunch? He claims that they had a routine, where he would go home to watch a movie with her. Benjamin writes that Ricardo could contemplate his future. Benjamin starts writing by hand and puts the typewriter away. A report has come in from Romano regarding suspicions involving 2 workers in the Morales building. Both workers have been placed under arrest for the alleged crime, and they have also confessed to their involvement. As a result, the case is now considered closed. Benjamin continues to interrogate the 2 men. However, he notices that one of the builders has been subjected to torture, just by looking at his bruises in order to extract a confession. This sight prompts Benjamin to confront Romano directly, accusing him of wrongly torturing innocent men. Romano swiftly retorts, dismissing the accused workers as mere rednecks. Feeling determined, Benjamin decides to file a formal complaint against Romano for his actions and handling of the situation. Later, Benjamin visits his partner Pablo, who frequents a bar and struggles with alcoholism. Benjamin expresses concern, as he notices that Pablo might not be paying for his drinks again. In a somewhat lighthearted manner, Benjamin jokes that he will cover the expenses for all the drinks. Beneath the jest, Benjamin is genuinely worried about Pablo's habits, which some people might attribute to funding his alcoholic lifestyle. Deciding to take action, Benjamin brings Pablo to his home, hoping to reconcile him with his wife. However, Pablo's wife refuses to take him back, leading Benjamin to bring Pablo to his own place. Subsequently, Benjamin delves into reviewing the photographs of Liliana and the crime scene. He also pays a visit to Ricardo, who provides him with additional photos. During their conversation, Ricardo recounts how he and Liliana met through their respective workplaces, a school for Liliana and a bank for Ricardo. Ricardo expresses his disbelief at his luck in being able to connect with Liliana. Curious about the consequences for the perpetrator once caught, Ricardo inquires whether capital punishment is a possibility. Benjamin assures him that the punishment will be a life sentence. Ricardo, sharing his perspective, reveals his preference for the perpetrator to suffer through old age, rather than face their immediate demise. While examining the photographs capturing Liliana's earlier years, Benjamin makes an intriguing discovery. He notices the consistent presence of a man who always seems to be looking at Liliana in the photos. Despite Liliana having no brothers, this individual appears in several pictures, his gaze fixed on her. To aid in remembering the names associated with the photographs, he has devised a system. He overlays an onion paper, traces the silhouettes of individuals, and assigns numbers to them. This allows him to list the names beside the corresponding numbers in the photographs. The mysterious man in question is identified as Isidoro Gomez. The narrative then shifts to an older Benjamin, who arranges a meeting with Irene at a cafe. During their conversation, he introduces the topic of the photos he's acquired, planning to incorporate them into the novel he is currently writing. Benjamin highlights the fact that Isidoro Gomez's eyes in the photographs exhibit a certain obsessive quality, as he gazes at Liliana. Reflecting on his current state, Benjamin reveals that he has taken up retired hobbies, a diversion from his past work in the judiciary. He goes on to explain that his thinking always seems to lead back to the Morales family. Returning to the past, Ricardo makes a call to Isidoro's home, seeking information about him. Isidoro's mother answers the call and informs Ricardo that her son has relocated to Buenos Aires. Ricardo fabricates a story that there's a job from a councilman, and he thinks of giving it to Isidoro. Despite the inconsistencies, Ricardo persists in his quest for information, inquiring about Isidoro's current residence and workplace during that time. He then directs his questioning towards Isidoro's relationship with Liliana. In response, Isidoro's mother reveals that Isidoro and Liliana used to spend time together. Overwhelmed by emotions, Ricardo struggles to maintain composure and fabricates another lie, claiming that Liliana is alive, despite his shaken voice. Sensing the distress in his voice, Isidoro's mother drops a hint that Isidoro had deep feelings for Liliana. This revelation proves to be too much for Ricardo to bear, leading him to break down in tears before eventually ending the call. Later, Benjamin and a police officer begin their search for Isidoro. A worker informs them that Isidoro hasn't been showing up for work. This prompts them to visit Isidoro's apartment, where the police officer reports that Isidoro received a late-night phone call before hastily packing up and leaving, even though he was owed a salary by the foreman. The inspector laments that they should have apprehended Isidoro sooner. Despite Benjamin's request to explore the countryside, to where Isidoro might have fled, the judge denies approval for such an action. Frustration mounts as Benjamin and Pablo once again find themselves at a bar, indulging in drinks. They share their dissatisfaction with the case and the bureaucratic hurdles impeding their progress. The situation is exacerbated by Ricardo's deteriorating mental condition and the knowledge that the murderer is aware the police are closing in. Benjamin also vents his irritation about his partner Pablo, whom he perceives as a degenerate drunk unwilling to cover his own drink expenses. Pablo and Benjamin decide to stake out near a building belonging to Isidoro's mother in Chivilcoy. During their surveillance, Isidoro's mother emerges from the building accompanied by a dog, while Pablo relieves himself in a vacant lot. At this moment, Benjamin takes an impulsive and illegal action by entering the house. Inside, he searches the house but finds it unoccupied. He proceeds to enter a room and meticulously examines various drawers filled with odds and ends. Here, he discovers a collection of letters exchanged between Isidoro and his mother. Pablo eventually joins Benjamin in the house, startling him. Pablo reassures Benjamin that the mother won't return for a while. Benjamin proceeds to show Pablo the recently exchanged letters, although none of them contain explicit addresses. Frustrated by the lack of information, Benjamin searches for the envelopes in the trash, but his efforts yield no results. Just as the mother unexpectedly returns home earlier than anticipated, her dog begins barking at the presence of strangers. This prompts the dog to chase Benjamin and Pablo out of the house, resulting in Benjamin being bitten. As they drive away from the scene, Pablo expresses concern about the possibility of rabies from the dog bite. Benjamin contemplates leaving the letters behind, but Pablo decides to keep them, much to Benjamin's anger. Benjamin understands that retaining the letters could potentially tip off Isidoro about the police's knowledge, adding to the complexity of the situation. Benjamin diligently begins studying the letters, hoping to uncover some concrete evidence linking Isidoro to the murder. However, the letters appear to be innocuous and don't reveal any significant connections. Despite his efforts, Benjamin struggles to find any breakthroughs within their contents. Later, a call from Irene interrupts their activities, as news arrives that the judge is seeking them. The judge is furious at Benjamin for disregarding his orders and taking unauthorized actions. The judge has learned about Benjamin's break-in and illegal stakeout. Moreover, a vigilant resident noticed their car parked overnight with the exact license plate number and reported it to the police, leading to a background check that revealed the vehicle was registered to Benjamin Esposito. However, the judge implies that this was done to intimidate Benjamin, and maintains a suspenseful mood. Amidst a series of phone calls, the judge receives information about lawyers under his jurisdiction. Adding to their troubles, someone spots them, particularly recognizing Pablo, who had been at the same grocery store, impulsively grabbed a bottle of whiskey and started drinking straight from it. Outside the situation, Irene expresses her displeasure, highlighting how Benjamin went behind her back. She asserts her demand for respect, emphasizing her role as an employer. In their ongoing efforts, they continue examining the letters, yet the contents continue to reveal very little. Irene subsequently calls Benjamin into her office and informs him that she has employed her persuasive charm to convince Judge Fortuna in Chivilcoy to call off the investigation. She warns Benjamin never to undertake such actions again. In a lighthearted moment, Benjamin playfully inquires about Irene's irresistible smile, which he claims to have never seen. Irene amusingly responds that she reserves it for her boyfriend. With that, Irene lets Benjamin go. Additionally, she instructs Benjamin to officially shut and archive the case of Liliana, deeming it as already concluded. Later, an older Irene takes a moment to peruse the photographs captured from their activities 2 decades earlier, with a particular focus on Irene's engagement announcement. Both Irene and Benjamin engage in nostalgia, reminiscing about their slightly younger selves from that era. With a sense of understanding, they acknowledge that they have transformed as individuals since those times. In a heartfelt conversation, Irene expresses her conviction that Benjamin's novel should continue, especially considering that the case was never truly closed. As their conversation draws to an end, Irene tenderly kisses Benjamin on the forehead before taking her leave, leaving him to reflect in solitude within the restaurant. Transitioning back to the 70s, Benjamin encounters Ricardo at the train station. Benjamin inquires about his well-being, and Ricardo reveals that he spends 2 days a week at the station, hoping to catch the perpetrator. It has been a year since Liliana's murder, and Ricardo wonders if Benjamin has given up on investigating. Benjamin reassures him that he hasn't stopped trying. Ricardo begins recounting memories of his time with Liliana before her tragic demise. He speaks about the importance of holding on to those memories, preserving them as a way to honor her. Later, Benjamin revisits Irene, engaging in a thoughtful discussion about viewing situations from different angles and the concept of empathy. He offers a hypothetical scenario for consideration. At Benjamin's request, Pablo joins them, forming a trio for the conversation. Benjamin mentions encountering Morales, who has been diligently present at the station every day in pursuit of the culprit. He emphasizes that Ricardo Morales remains trapped in the past, unable to move forward. Pablo proposes that Ricardo deserves another chance to reopen the case. The three of them discuss the possibility of asking Irene to destroy an official document related to it. Although Irene hesitates due to the potential impact on her reputation and the legality of the action, she eventually agrees to listen further. As the conversation continues, she closes the door, indicating her willingness to delve deeper into their proposal. Benjamin and Pablo find themselves once again buried under piles of paperwork. Eventually, Benjamin starts searching for the letters, only to discover that Pablo has them. Pablo decides to head to a cafe to privately review the letters and their contents. Sitting down to talk, Pablo unfolds his insights about why Isidoro has proven elusive. He asks Benjamin to listen attentively as he delves into his discoveries while rereading the letters. Pablo notices a recurring theme. Isidoro is constantly on the move, frequently changing jobs. He contemplates the idea that Isidoro is like an ordinary person striving to transform himself into someone different, all while maintaining an underlying passion. This leads Pablo to reflect on his own nature as a passionate individual. Pablo draws a contrast between himself and Benjamin, highlighting how he, Pablo, tends to wait for miracles to happen. He acknowledges his feelings for Irene, who is engaged and getting married, a situation that also represents a form of passion for him. Later, Pablo visits another notary to read the first letter Isidoro wrote. Within the cryptic clues of the letter, he identifies names and details that correspond to a series of football games. Pablo formulates the notion that a person can change many aspects of their life, but their passion remains constant. Coming to a mutual understanding, Benjamin realizes what Pablo is talking about. Isidoro is a devoted fan of the Racing Club football team. This revelation solidifies their understanding of Isidoro's possible whereabouts. They head to the stadium for a match between Racing Club and Huracan Club. Pablo begins attempting to identify Isidoro among the crowd, but Benjamin points out the futility of the task, given the sheer number of spectators present. Despite this, Pablo eventually believes he spots Isidoro, only to discover that he's mistaken. It's been a month of attending games in the hopes of finding him. Later, within the bustling crowd, Benjamin manages to catch a glimpse of Isidoro. However, Isidoro is already on the move, attempting to evade capture. Pablo gives chase, but Isidoro proves swifter and manages to escape even the notice of the police officers present. A tense pursuit ensues, and Pablo's senses lead him to the restroom area. He checks each cubicle one by one, and in an unexpected turn of events, Isidoro emerges from one of the cubicles and attacks Pablo. After the altercation, Isidoro flees once more, leading to a cat-and-mouse chase involving both him and the police officers. As the chase escalates, Isidoro finds himself with no other option but to scale a wall and enter the center field while the game is ongoing. Amidst the match, Isidoro collides with one of the players, drawing attention to himself and slowing his progress. This gives the pursuing police officers the opportunity they need to catch up to him and finally apprehend him, putting an end to the prolonged chase. Isidoro is taken to the court. Irene asks Benjamin for a strategy to get a confession out of him, but Irene does not agree with the tactics Benjamin says, such as showing photos of the crime scenes, as they are illegal. While arguing and stopping Irene from going away, he accidentally snaps off the button on Irene's top. Later, Benjamin initiates his interrogation of Isidoro by delving into personal details. Isidoro feigns innocence, asking why he's being questioned. Benjamin sternly reminds Isidoro of the crimes he's being accused of, casting a shadow on their conversation. Isidoro asserts his knowledge of Liliana, but denies any involvement, questioning what happened to her. Despite Isidoro's claims of innocence, the evidence against him and his behavior following Liliana's assault and murder paint a suspicious picture. Irene arrives, informing Benjamin that Pablo is unaccounted for, as he was supposed to be Benjamin's partner. Meanwhile, during their conversation, Irene's clothing reveals a portion of her bra, and breast. Isidoro's gaze turns malicious as he notices, and Irene catches him staring, hastily covering up. Weirdly enough, Irene asserts that Isidoro couldn't have committed the crime, as he appears to be innocent. Benjamin disagrees and requests Irene to display the photos to Isidoro, a tactic she opposes. Continuing her interrogation, Irene strikes at Isidoro's ego and masculinity. Benjamin adds that the absence of forced entry implies Liliana knew her assailant. They begin casting doubt on Liliana's character, portraying her as someone who pursued men, implying a motive opposite to Isidoro's. Irene persistently provokes Isidoro until he reaches a boiling point. Amidst the escalating tension, a drunk Pablo bursts into the office in a fit of rage. Irene continues to taunt Isidoro, comparing autopsy findings with Isidoro's physique, suggesting that he is physically weaker than Liliana's assailant. The insults continue, targeting Isidoro's manhood. At this point, Isidoro abruptly stands and unzips his pants, shocking everyone present. In a moment of aggression, he slaps Irene. Benjamin and a guard quickly intervene, restraining Isidoro. Amid the struggle, Isidoro admits to having touched Liliana against her will, finally revealing his crimes. Later on, Benjamin visits Ricardo to inform him that Isidoro has been apprehended. Returning to the 90s timeline, Benjamin's thoughts are interrupted by the sound of his phone ringing. But it's just a product of his imagination. Soon after, Irene calls him, bringing him back to reality. She engages in a conversation about the novel Benjamin is working on, and expresses her interest in reading it. In 1975, Isabel Perón ends her presidency, and preparations for Irene's wedding are in full swing. During the televised coverage of Perrón's events, Ricardo watches the broadcast and notices someone on the television screen. At the same time, Benjamin's telephone rings in his home, and it's Ricardo calling. Coincidentally, Benjamin is also watching the television. As he pays closer attention, Benjamin spots Isidoro's face among the security details behind Mrs. Perón. Isidoro is shown smiling in the background, revealing that he is part of Mrs. Perrón's security team. Both Benjamin and Irene confront Romano regarding this revelation. It turns out that Romano was the one who bailed Isidoro out. He had begun working within the jail by betraying other members of guerrilla groups, and eventually became a hitman for the far-right political faction. Romano's priorities lie with pursuing subversives, rather than seeking justice or addressing Isidoro's crimes. Benjamin accuses Romano of orchestrating this as a way to exact revenge on him, a motive that seems apparent. Romano challenges them to attempt an appeal, expressing doubt that it would yield any significant result. In a further attack, Romano questions Benjamin's suitability for Irene. Defeated by Romano's actions and their betrayal, both Benjamin and Irene exit Romano's office in silence, deeply affected by the revelation. The elevator ride is filled with an air of shock and betrayal. Unexpectedly, Isidoro enters the elevator with them, seemingly to intensify their discomfort. Isidoro deliberately displays his gun, cocking it in front of them, creating an unsettling and tense atmosphere that leaves them speechless in an awkward silence. Afterward, Benjamin goes to see Ricardo to deliver the unfortunate news that Isidoro has been bailed out, and is now seemingly untouchable. Ricardo responds with a bitter observation that if anyone tries to take action against Isidoro, they will end up in jail while Isidoro remains free. Benjamin offers an apology, but Ricardo departs, carrying a sense of disappointment. Despite this, he maintains a glimmer of positivity, thanking Benjamin for his unwavering efforts. In the courthouse, Benjamin sits smoking, his gaze fixed blankly on the passing people. Eventually, an intern calls his attention, informing him that Irene is looking for him. She calls him, initiating a conversation in which she asks about the possibility of their future conversations. Irene takes a moment to dispel Romano's assertion, asserting that she is not truly untouchable. Benjamin suggests that she's destined to marry someone of high status. Later, Irene challenges Benjamin to protest to her engagement, and even her impending marriage. A decision is made to meet again later in the day to continue their conversation. A phone call interrupts Benjamin. It's from a bar, and he immediately knows it's Pablo. Sure enough, when he arrives at the bar, he finds Pablo already intoxicated and causing a commotion by picking fights with people inside. Benjamin attempts to persuade Pablo to leave, but Pablo remains stubbornly defiant. Eventually, Benjamin manages to get Pablo out of the bar and brings him back to his own home. As he tries to contact Pablo's wife for assistance, he discovers that the phone has not been working for 6 months. With time running short before his meeting with Irene, Benjamin leaves the sleeping Pablo on the couch in a rush. Hastily, Benjamin goes to Pablo's house to fetch Pablo's wife, pleading for her understanding. Upon their return, they find Benjamin's door broken, indicating a break-in. As they enter, a chilling discovery awaits them. Pablo has been shot. It becomes clear that the intended target was Benjamin, but the hitman mistakenly murdered Pablo. Suspicion falls heavily on Isidoro, due to his association with Romano's group. Fearing for Benjamin's safety, Irene forces him to go into hiding in Jujuy with her cousins. Despite his reluctance, Irene insists that there's no alternative. In a poignant moment, Benjamin lightly grazes Irene's face instead of embracing her, and bids her farewell. On the day of his departure, Benjamin boards a train bound for Jujai. As the train begins to move, Irene rushes to catch up and manages to touch hands with Benjamin through the train's windows. In a dramatic sequence, Benjamin runs to the end of the train, watching Irene chase after it until she's out of sight. Jumping ahead to the 90s, Benjamin hands over the rough draft of his novel to Irene. She's left momentarily speechless before requesting tea. While sipping her tea, she admires the house and notes that Benjamin hasn't changed residences since Pablo's demise. In a poignant exchange, Irene shares her perspective on the events, particularly the moment on the train tracks. However, it becomes apparent that this memory is a construct of Benjamin's imagination. Irene questions whether the event really occurred, and if it did, why Benjamin didn't invite her to join him. They pivot to a lighter tone, discussing the novel and shifting the mood. Subsequently, both Irene and Benjamin visit an agency to inquire about Isidoro's new address. It turns out that Isidoro is still using his mother's address. Their search then leads them to check Ricardo's new address as well. Ricardo now resides in the countryside, and Benjamin decides to pay him a visit. Upon arriving at Ricardo's house, Benjamin notices the seemingly unoccupied state of the property and decides to sound the horn. Eventually, Ricardo emerges as an older man, displaying some signs of balding. Benjamin reintroduces himself, and it takes a moment for recognition to register on Ricardo's face. His surprise is evident. With recognition established, Ricardo warmly welcomes Benjamin into the house. Inside, Ricardo begins to recount the details of their lives since their last meeting 25 years ago. It becomes evident that Ricardo has not been able to move on from the loss of Liliana. Despite the passage of time, he still works at the bank, but has relocated to the countryside as a means of starting anew. Benjamin initiates a conversation with Ricardo, asking how he has been managing, and why he remains single and living alone. Ricardo's response is enigmatic, mentioning that the situation is complex for him. Benjamin shares a bit about his own marital history, describing it as complicated. He shows Ricardo his novel, and though Ricardo is impressed, he advises Benjamin against publishing it, deeming it a mistake. Despite this, Benjamin continues to inquire about the case and Isidoro's whereabouts. At that very moment, Isidoro remains at large after murdering Pablo. Ricardo acknowledges being aware of it, having read about Pablo's fate in the newspaper when Isidoro was mentioned. The conversation takes a tense turn when Benjamin probes Ricardo about how he has managed to cope with Liliana's passing for a quarter of a century. Benjamin's skepticism becomes apparent, especially as Ricardo spent a year waiting for Isidoro to be captured. Tensions escalate, leading to him kicking Benjamin out of the house. Before leaving, Benjamin makes an effort to clarify certain details to Ricardo. He reveals that there's been no news of Pablo's passing, because Isidoro thought he had murdered Benjamin himself. He shares his theory that the photos he found were turned face down, leading to a fictional scenario where imaginary men confront him and Pablo. While it remains a theory, Benjamin assures Ricardo that he will apprehend Isidoro, regardless of the obstacles. Ricardo's demeanor changes, and he invites Benjamin back inside. He begins to confess his actions, revealing that he devised a plan to deal with Isidoro. Ricardo waited for the right moment, stalked Isidoro until he was isolated, attacked him, kidnapped him, and ultimately shot him with the revolver before disposing of the body. Ricardo asks Benjamin to let go of the matter, asserting that it's not worth dwelling on. Benjamin leaves, but suspicion lingers in his mind, as he's not entirely satisfied with Ricardo's confession. He recalls a conversation from 25 years ago, where Ricardo expressed that he never wanted a capital sentence as a punishment for Liliana's murderer, as it would have been too easy. Driven by his doubts, Benjamin returns to Ricardo's house, and covertly follows him to the back of the house. There, he witnesses Ricardo offering food to none other than Isidoro, who is imprisoned in a cell. Isidoro pleads with Benjamin to make Ricardo speak to him, as Ricardo has never spoken a word to him, leaving Isidoro in isolation for 25 years. Ricardo reminds Benjamin of his promise to ensure a life sentence for Liliana's perpetrator. After this startling revelation, Benjamin leaves. Later, he visits Pablo's grave, and then he heads to Irene's office, where he finally confesses his long-awaited love to her.